I suppose it's time to tell another story. This one goes back to when I was a kid again, and I've told you before about my cousin Alan. And Alan was kind of an incorrigible child, I guess you could say. He was kind of a wild kid. He was a few months younger than me, and I grew up with him. He was born in October of '68, and I was born in July of '68. So he was just a little younger than me anyway, but he was pretty much left to his own devices and allowed to run wild, and he used to get into some pretty wild situations. He'd do some pretty crazy things, and I've already told some stories, like about the time that he flooded the neighbor's car when we took him to on vacation with us. And we were staying in a housekeeping cabin, and he used the landlady's garden hose to flood the neighbor's car, and different things like that, But anyway, today's story, this goes back to around 1974, and basically what had happened was my dad got a call at home on a Saturday afternoon from my aunt, who was Alan's mother. And she was quite upset, and she was kind of a woman who drank heavily and had some issues, and so on like that anyway, and she was quite upset. Alan was complaining that he was having stomach pains, and she didn't know what it was, but she figured he needed to go to the emergency ward. So she called my dad to go over there and pick him up, take him to the hospital. So, of course, my dad, he gets in the car, he drives over there, picks the two of them up. My aunt was a single mother at that time, and so it was just her and my cousin and my dad. And they go over to the hospital, and the doctor examines my cousin, and it turns out he had some sort of an issue because of just uncleanliness, basically. And he developed a rash, and that's the reason that his stomach was hurting, I guess. It wasn't like an inside thing, it was an outside thing. It turns out his stomach was hurting because of a rash, basically. And so the doctor told my aunt to get him some Epsom salts. And of course, she didn't know what to do with them. She says, well, what am I supposed to do with them? And the doctor was so exasperated with her at that time. He says, bathe them in them, GD, bathe them in them, Well, I guess Alan, he got a little disturbed at the doctor speaking to his mother that way, because the doctor really barked at her when he said that to her. So he hops down off the gurney, and he goes across the room, and he pulls the fire alarm. Well, now they had to evacuate the hospital. Apparently, my dad ran over and tried to pull the thing back up, but of course that didn't do anything, and the doctor told him, he said, that won't do any good. Once that's been activated, it has to be turned off manually. And once it's activated, then by law, we have to evacuate the building, even though we know the cause of it. We still have to evacuate the building. So they had to evacuate the hospital, and of course the fire department had to come up and everything. Well, my dad, he took my aunt and my cousin home. And they lived on the top floor of a house, and it was one of these old houses where there was a porch. On the top floor of the front of the porch, there was a balcony. Basically, on top of the front porch of the house, there was a balcony for the upstairs. And so you could walk out onto the roof of the porch, basically, from the upstairs. The house was divided into two apartments. There was an old elderly couple had the place downstairs, and my aunt and my cousin were in the upstairs apartment. Well, they get home. My dad gets my aunt and my cousin home, and of course they pull in up in front of the house, and the police pull in behind them. The police want to talk about this fire alarm situation at the hospital. So my dad and my aunt and the cop, they're standing on the front lawn of the house, and the cop is asking them about what had happened and about, all that business. My cousin, he'd went ahead into the house. Well, what does he do? He comes out onto the porch, onto the balcony over the porch, and he's got a wash pail full of water. And he tips the wash pail upside down over the cop's head. Just dumps a pail of water over the cop's head. Well, that didn't go over very well. Apparently he was afraid he was going to be in trouble. So that was his reaction, is that he dumped a pail of water over the cop's head. And anyway, the cop wasn't too happy about it, but that was that. In the end, nothing much came of it, really. But yeah, I guess it was kind of an uncomfortable moment for my dad, It was one of those no good deed goes unpunished type deals. So that's what happened there anyway, and that's just another story about my cousin. He's passed away. He passed away about 10 years ago. Just very tough life, and it caught up with him and he passed away. But, so rest in peace to my cousin Alan, anyway, and wherever he is, I hope he doesn't mind me telling these stories, I mean, they're kind of funny to tell now. It wasn't funny at the time. It wasn't funny at the time at all when he did these things, but looking back on it, it's kind of funny. He was like Dennis the Menace, but on steroids. He was. The things he did, it was crazy. Anyway, just some stories that I remember that I get a bit of a kick out of when I remember them, and I hope you guys are kind of entertained by them too, and also partly for family members of mine who weren't around back then, because like I've said before, in some cases I'm the last one alive who knows about this stuff, so, and even the ones who do know about it that are still alive, a lot of the time they're few and far between, and they're on their last legs, so they're on their way out. And I mean, at some point I'll be on my way out too, and with things being the way they are with my life, that may come sooner than later. So that's why I feel a certain urgency just to tell these stories anyway about my life and about things from my family and so on. And just to kind of make a record of some of the silly stuff that happened anyway, some of the funny stuff and some of the tragic stuff, and the things that happen in a person's life. That's all. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the story, and I hope you're all having a good afternoon, and I'll talk to you later.